Well, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at action panning, panning your camera for action shots. Anything that's moving, you can use panning techniques, which are very, very simple to do, to add real impact to your images. So first of all, we'll go off on location and show you some shots. So panning is a technique of capturing moving subjects sharply or semi-sharply while allowing the background and foreground to blur. Now you can see I've shot a lot of images here. This is just with one focal length. I changed the lens as you can see in the video. And this technique really is all about shooting lots of frames and experimenting. Now, obviously with digital, you can afford to shoot lots of frames, and you can obviously get instant feedback off the back of the camera to see sort of effects you're getting. But normally, panning shots are done when the subject is moving parallel to the camera, like in these shots here. Sometimes you can also use it when the subject is coming at you in a more of a diagonal direction across the camera. But it is a little bit more tricky to pan nice and cleanly and smoothly when subjects are moving diagonally. But nonetheless, with a bit of practice, it can be done. You can obviously do the panning with the camera either handheld, or sometimes I'll even do it with the camera on a tripod. Handheld is kind of my preferred option because it means you're a little bit more versatile, especially if the subject is coming at you at slightly different angles each time. You can quickly adjust and try and compensate for that. Whereas on a tripod, you're really on a fixed plane. But either will do the job. But as I said, you really, I think handheld you'll find in the long run a lot easier and a bit more versatile. Now, if you are hand holding, it's very important that your feet are firmly apart and steady on the ground. And the idea is to swing the camera from your hips in a nice fluid motion. And ideally, the idea of panning it is to match the camera panning speed with the speed of your subject. So it takes a bit of practice to get right, but that is the general idea, and that's why it's best to take plenty of shots and get in a bit of a rhythm for doing it. Another big help is that if you're, say, shooting a car, which I do quite a lot of, is to make sure the road that the car's travelling on is fairly flat. Now, that seems pretty obvious, but depending on what country you're living in, the road surfaces will vary quite a bit. Now, England we have, quite various conditions of roads, and some of them, have got lots of subsidence in them. Now, if you can imagine a car travelling across the road in front of you, if it's dipping and pitching, you're not really going to get a nice smooth pan from that shot. So bear that in mind. It's a real big help if the surface is flat. A lot of the times I don't tend to use the autofocus on my camera, but this is one of the few times I do. I think it's a good idea to let your camera do some of the work for you, so you can just concentrate on getting your panning nice and smooth. So the first thing I would do is switch your autofocus to the servo mode, which basically means it'll actually track the object for you. You don't have to worry about the focus. You just let that take care of itself, and you can just concentrate on just getting that nice smooth panning motion. Set your drive to shoot on the continuous mode, so you just keep your finger pressed down the shutter and just keep firing. Now you want to start to pan your object before it gets into frame, so start off on, say, the right hand or the left hand side, and just pan the camera through, keep matching the speed, and then when it gets to the sweet spot in front of you where you really want to get some shots, it starts shooting, and just keep your finger on that button and keep firing. Shutter speed, now this is a bit of a difficult one. Shutter speed depends on several factors. The first one is how fast your subject is moving. Obviously, a car, it's going to be move faster, say, than a kid on a bike or a skateboard, or maybe a jogger. So that's one thing you've got to consider is how fast your subject is moving. How much blurring you want is another factor. You may well want lots of blurring. You don't care if the whole object is sharp or not. The direction the subject's moving, if it's, as I said before earlier, if it's parallel to you, it's a little bit easier to track to the frame. If it's coming at a slight angle, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And again, shutter speed will need adjusting to help you with that. And the other thing is the lens focal length. If you're using a wide-angle lens, you're going to be a lot closer to the object you're panning, and that is very difficult actually because you've got less time. You're so close to the object, you've got less time to pan through, and you're going to get a lot more blurring. So you may need to kind of have a higher shutter speed to compensate for that. And obviously the distance you are from the subject as well. Again, if you had a longer lens, as I used on the later shots, which I'll show you in a little while, you get a bit more time and a bit more time to actually track your object to the frame, and you actually do get better and more consistent results, I find, with that. Other tips is to the closer the background is to the subject, the more blurry you get. If you look at this image here behind me, the railing behind the car is a lot closer, and that's quite a lot more blurred, and the foreground, whereas the background right in the distance is less so. And finally, a bit obvious I suppose, but the key to this is to experiment with different shutter speeds and lens combinations. So if you've got your wide angle on, try different shutter speeds with that, see what's coming out better. You may find yourself very good at panning and you get a higher success rate, but the key is just to experiment. Now you're probably wondering at this stage, well, how sharp is acceptable? Well, to be honest with you, there's no hard and fast rules. This image, for instance, was shot at a 20th of a second on a 140mm lens, and the car was coming at me at quite a diagonal type of angle, and it's quite a tough angle to sometimes keep everything pin sharp. But does that really matter? I don't think it does. With this image, for instance, the front of the car is nice and sharp, and then obviously we've got this blurring at the back, but that gives a sense of motion, and I think it works really well. And I think as long as some of it's sharp, then that's acceptable. But again, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve and your subject matter. But don't get hung up about it. It's always going to be a bit of a compromise between how something that's going to be over sharp or something that's going to be over blurred. And it's just getting that compromise right, and you're only going to get that by experimenting. Right, so I've pulled out about half a dozen or so images from our shoot, shot at various focal lengths. I started off with a 28 to 70mm lens and used the wide setting, well, fairly wide, it was 35mm. Then I used it on 70mm, and then I changed and put a 70 to 200mm lens on the camera to show you the different effects that you can get. So this is the first one of the first images I pulled out. This one was shot at the 30th of a second on the 35mm end of the 28 to 70 lens, and as you can see, it's quite a low down shot. As I said earlier, panning with wide angles can be a bit tricky because your subject matter it tends to come across the frame very, very quickly, so you tend to have to use slightly higher shutter speeds in my experience to get something that's anywhere near sharp. But again, it's you can try it with slower ones. Normally from shooting cars, it's a bit more difficult because there's such tends to be a lot wider than a child on a scooter. There's another shot, same focal length again. So you can see there's quite a lot of blurring in the background and also in the foreground, but some parts of him are sharp, and again I think that's quite acceptable. We then move on to the 70mm. Now you can see the background. If you look at the the perspective is being compressed a little bit, which is quite nice. Also, as the lenses get longer, you're going to drop the focus more. It's not going to be quite as sharp in the background without stopping down. So that's also quite a nice effect if you want that. If you want to drop the focus a little bit. So this one was done as a 30th, again on 70mm. and this one. You can see the blurring is a little bit. This one's done on the 20th, slightly slower. The blurring is a little bit better on these ones, a little bit more consistent compared to the wide angle shots. And then we move up then to something a bit longer. Again, this 87mm, 30th again. And you can see the background again. He's a lot bigger in frame, and we're obviously sat a lot further back to shoot him with the longer lens. And I just think it gives that flattering of the planes. It brings that background forward and compresses everything together, and that creates quite a nice look to the image. Here's another one, 40th, just going landscape this time, and again quite a nice compression there with the longer lens on. And there's another one, so you can see there's quite a difference. I quite like the longer shots personally, but again, it all depends on what effect you're going for. So there we go, 87mm, 70mm, and then the wide angles. So the choice is yours really, but again, I'll stress it, it's just a matter of trying different shutter speeds with different focal lengths combinations.